Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. You're going to be so glad you're here. My friend, CK Sims, is here. Every once in a while, I get to be on somebody's show and I go, man, I love this person so much. I want them on my show. And that's what happened with CK because we just connected. He's amazing in every way. So obviously, he has a podcast. I was on his show and it's so good. Pardon my noggin. I love that word. I love the title. But you're going to find out a lot about CK today. And so here we go. CK, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here, and I would agree. Having you on the show was a delight, and you just seemed to be very down to earth and personable, and you had a lot to offer in the way of wisdom and kindness. So, and that's the type of people I connect with, right? Is those people. So, it was a pleasure having you on the show, and it's great to be here. So.
Yeah, well, very kind words. If you could please pass those words on to my kids, I'd appreciate that, especially the wisdom one. Because
Yeah,
obviously they think I'm kind, but the wisdom one, I think it confuses them sometimes. So feel free to write
well,
them a letter and say.
I think as children, we have a tendency to brush our parents' wisdom or words under the rug as sort of ancient, or what's that word I'm looking for?
Old.
Irrelevant to
Oh.
them in their lives,
Mhm.
because our lives are not what our parents lived, right? So
Right.
we're like, my dad's like, well, make sure you put, um, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example, but I don't know, you should always put an extra 20% of your paycheck away for savings for a rainy day. Like, which is great advice. But when you're younger, when I was 20, my father was saying that to me, I was like, uh, I'm like, I only live once, so I'm going to spend my money. But it was sage advice. So kids should listen to their parents. It might seem like harping and nagging, but it's not. It is actually wisdom.
Yeah,
So
well, and thank you for that. I think that's so true. And there are so many of those things, right, that you hear from your parents that at the time you're like, oh my gosh, why are they saying this to me? And, whatever. And then you look back and I find myself saying those same thing to my kids and now to my grandchildren. So there must be something there to make it valid. So I'm so glad to be with you, to be able to spend time with you. And I just want you to talk a bit about yourself. What was 7-year-old CK like?
um 7-year-old CK was in a metal brace, with with a triangular brace that his legs were strapped into, who had so much energy, that this very heavy weighted brace um, could not restrict him. So he was boisterous and energetic and a massive zest for life, and loved to read and to sing and to have fun. And he loved his mama and he loved his dad and he loved his brother and his sister, but he was also stubborn, you know, and too adventurous for his own good. Hence why he was in that brace to start with. There was three events that led to my mother noticing that as I was walking across the floor, I had a limp in my right leg. It's so long ago now, I can't remember. Anyway, and she made me walk and she made me walk. And they took me to a specialist, and it turned out that I had fallen out of a car, jumped out once, was thrown from a car the second time. Yeah, so very adventurous too adventurous for his own good. That my hip had dislodged from the socket partially and began to deteriorate.
Mm.
So this brace was a required necessity to repair that damage and get me back to being able to walk without a limp. So yeah, that was
Wow.
7-year-old Curtis.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that version of Curtis lasted for a while. I would have to say that for the most part in my life, I've always just been someone who kind of loves life. And I say kind of because I do love life, and I think I've always loved life. But puberty hit, and things changed, and kind of darkness sort of started to sweep in. So I'm gay. I think maybe we did. I'm not sure if that came up in our last conversation, but I'm gay. And I grew up, my parents are Pentecostal ministers, both of them. And I was taught to believe that gay people or homosexuals were abominations and depravities of God. Okay.
Mhm.
And, I grew up in a very religious household with my parents going to church, all of those sort of things. So those beliefs were then my beliefs. And when you're a child and you discover that you are something that is considered evil and disgusting and awful in the eyes of God, that's a lot to bear, especially where you don't understand why you're gay. And so I would say maybe from 9 is when I really truly started to understand that I was not like other boys, and that I liked other boys and wanted to be close to them. It wasn't really sexual at that point, but there was this draw to be closer to other guys. And as we progressed, I'm realizing that I'm this thing that's like, in the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah, like all of these different things. I am this. And that was hard, because I didn't want to be. I didn't. I didn't want to be a depravity. I didn't want to be an abomination. I didn't want to be gay. I would have given anything to not be gay and pray to not be gay. Oh my goodness, how much prayer. I begged God to take it from me, but it never went away. And I couldn't understand why it wouldn't go away, why I was here, broken and afraid as a child, as a teenager growing up, begging God and praying to be delivered from it, that he wouldn't take it away. I couldn't compute the two. And there were three times that I sort of came out to my parents growing up. Um, Once in grade 3, once in grade 6, and another time in grade 8. The grade 8 time was probably the worst time because in grade 8, you're like 13, 14 years old. Your hormones are raging. Okay. And I there was no one I could talk to about what I was feeling inside. Like I had to hide every bit of who I was because, well, no one could find out. I'm the pastor's kid. Like that would destroy my family's career or whatever. The congregate, like there's so many things. But I wrote that I had this teacher who I found absolutely breathtaking in every way. I had like a 13 or 14, like teenage mad crush on this man in my school. And he was our science teacher, and I wrote him a very descriptive email, or an email, sorry. I'm we didn't use email back then. It was on paper. And I remember so clearly that I went to school that day, and I don't know what 13 or 14-year-old me. I can't remember exactly the age, but just know that it was grade 8. And then I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I knew what I thought. I remember I know what I hoped to happen, which to think back now is like, you're so lost as a child because I'm like, he would be committing crime. And like, hello, but you're 13, 14 years old. So you're just like, whatever. So I write this descriptive note. And I remember going to school that day and like I worked up the courage to go like put it in his office. It was anonymous, but it was like my first step. Because like in my mind, so like if I could let him know that there's someone that wants him this badly, that maybe he'll know it's me and like reach out to me privately. So absolutely bonkers. And so yeah, I did. But here's the thing. I went in, his office was in the hallway, so the back office was like a open area where the guidance counselor was housed. I walked right into the guidance counselor's office, looked at a couple books, turned around, and I had the letter in my hand. And as I was walking past his door, there's a chair by the door, and I just tossed the letter there and keep walking. However, and in true Curtis fashion, as I would say, is that day I had a $2 bill, because in Canada we had $2 bills for a really long time, for my lunch, and the letter. And what I threw on his chair was my lunch, my lunch money. So I was like, oh shit, what am I gonna do? All of these things. So I think it's a good idea to go sort of repeat my steps and swap them. And well, anyway, I repeat my steps and he's looking out the window and I swap them. And just as I'm pulling my hands away from the chair, he turns and he sees me and I keep walking. And I'm like, oh God, I'm dying. And then the lunch came and I went outside on the front steps of the school, which is right next to the open windows, open principal's window, right? And I could hear them talking. And I'm like, oh no, oh no, no, no. And then I go back to class, and my teacher, Mrs. Porter, I remember, I hope that she is alive and well. And if she ever sees this podcast, I want her to know that she is one of the primary factors in why I started to write. And my love for words came from her. But she asked me if I wrote any letters lately. And I'm like, no, what do you mean? And then my name comes over the principal's office and or the intercom, sorry. And we go to the principal's office. And the principal sits me down and he tells me that we found this letter. We know it's from you. You can either tell us the truth or we'll have it fingerprinted. Now, I just want to point out that Curtis, CK, me, young Curtis, was not the brightest. So I also know my rights. Nobody's going to fingerprint a dirty letter against a 13 or 14-year-old in a small town in Newfoundland. It's just not going to happen. So, but that was enough to scare me. And in that moment, I confessed to him and I told him. And I told him, he asked me why I wrote it. And I said, and I remember just sobbing, because I'm gay and I don't want to be, right? But like, you know, and so anyway, he gives me time to go freshen up and go back to class. And then there's recess. And I walk out, and as I'm walking out, I see a very familiar figure in the chair in the principal's office with their back very straight, their hair lovely coiffed, and their legs crossed at the heels, sitting with their hands folded. And I'm like, oh God, they called my mom. And my dad. And so anyway, long story short, I thank God to this day that the principal had enough kindness in his heart to not show my parents that letter.
Mm.
even though they requested it. Because, oh, yeah. Um, but yeah, they took me, put me into therapy, a Christian psychologist, which created a lot of anger in me. Because I didn't need a Christian psychologist. I just needed a psychologist to help me work through what's going on with me, right? I didn't need to be told that it's not a sin if you don't act on it. I just needed to understand why I have this, why it won't go away, right?
Right.
Anyway, I held on to that hatred, FYI, for I would say 20 plus years until I became friends with a psychologist. And we were chatting about this one day. And she advises me that based on the DSM-3, the one that they would have been using during that time, homosexuality was still classified as a mental.
Wow. Wow.
He was just doing his job. And it was almost like my whole life, I hated this man, hated him. And then there was this massive void where all that hate was. And then didn't know what to do with myself. I was like, what? I'm like, he was just doing his job. Okay, fine. But yeah, so I don't even know
Wow.
how I got here, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, my word. So I went to an Assembly of God church for years. I grew up Catholic. I went to an Assembly of God church for years. Then I went to a non-denominational church and whatever. But I I never understood the church's stance. I never understood how a couple, literally a couple of verses in the Bible, make people who are created in God's image and gay, created that way, right? Born that way, it's who you are. Why we would send those people to hell? Like, why? Why would we do that? I never understood it. And then as I investigated, as I got older and wanted to know more, man, we get it so wrong. The church gets it so wrong. The only reason Sodom and Gomorrah had nothing to do with homosexuality. Why it was destroyed had nothing to do with homosexuality. It had everything to do with not welcoming people in. It had everything to do with hospitality and welcoming people in. And the calling of the men to, send your men out, send your men out. They had nothing to do with homosexuality. They had everything to do with rape. I mean, so for years and still within so many churches, to take that and go, oh, must mean homosexuality is an abomination. It's just so wrong. It's just so wrong. I am so sorry for the Christian world for what you've had to go. I'm apologizing for the entire Christian world right now for what you had to go through as a kid because CK, I cannot imagine being this kid, knowing who you are, you know who you were, but at the same time being told that who you are is wrong. Man.
and it's interesting because right now, like, and for the last, I would say since 35 at least, I consider myself a gay Christian. And I love Jesus. I love God. I pray often. I try to live as Jesus would live. And my parents and my relationship, it's good. Like they know, and it's not that they accept really, but it's one of those things that they love me anyway, so it doesn't matter. And then, recently, I would say a couple months ago, my dad, for the first time in my entire life, sort of validated my existence in a way he didn't realize. But it was more along the lines of he was worried about mom, and he said, "I know that you are very faith. You have your faith, and you talk to God a lot, and I want you to pray for your mom." And I'm like, well, I'm not gonna have my faith, it's not your faith. And he goes and says, who am I to invalidate your faith? Right. So coming from my dad as a pastor, that was massive. And I don't even know if I've told him that, but yeah, it was very massive. But it was my sister who really brought me back. So I think I mentioned in the email this afternoon that I talk about the life event at 35. And I have talked about this on my podcast before. But teenage Curtis, the darkness started to whisper in, and what I would call the very long fight began with keeping those darknesses at bay and to try and stay somewhat functional, and then keep in mind my brain has not ever worked the way an atypical person's brain has worked. It just doesn't, right? So for a very long time, both school, church, everything was trying to fit this very square person in a round hole. Does not work. And I tried everything in my power to conform until I couldn't try anymore. And I left school, went into the gay world, sort of lost myself as most gay people do in the gay world. It's not necessarily a very friendly place or a healthy place, really, for someone who's lost and not deeply rooted in their values. And for the next, like, I guess, until I was 35. So I had fun, don't get me wrong. Like, there are lots of great memories, a lot of wonderful memories, a lot of things I've done that I'm not proud of. They're mostly things that I've done that I'm not proud of between that 18 to say 35 period. I was in survival mode at all times with relationships. Things were very transactional. My brain was in darkness. And then at 30, I was diagnosed with, after a lot of therapy, mind you, I was diagnosed with type 2 bipolar disorder. And so I spent my life thinking like there has to be something wrong with me, right? And then I found out there was something wrong with me, if you will, for a moment. And then the doctors put me on absolutely everything that they could throw at me, which is like the worst thing you could possibly do. But who was I to argue with people who went to med school for 10 years? Like, so we're gonna fast forward, 35 comes. The previous 3.5 years were the darkest years of my life. And when I say darkness, I really want people to, if you're thinking what it might feel like, just think about the true absence of light, the absence of joy, the absence of laughter or meaningful connection, any of that sort of thing. And it's not that things that happen around you aren't meaningful or there aren't laughter and things like that, but it doesn't come from deep within. It comes from a very sort of surface level because deep within is turmoil. It's just turmoil. And I think it was the last, this is worsening over 3.5 years. And what really made a massive change for me in a sense that I started to think a little differently about what my life was going to look like was on top of that darkness, then came hopelessness. And the hopelessness is worse than the darkness because even in darkness, you still have hope, right? You're trying to cling to that hope. You're trying to think, just keep going, keep pushing, keep, doing what you have to do. Like one day it will get better. When the hopelessness shows up, then that goes as well. So any conduit that you have to light has now been taken away. And like hopelessness for me was along the lines of like, I'd think about maybe planning a trip with, my best friend. And the second I would think about planning that trip, this thing would happen in my brain and it would be like, what's the point? What's the point to plan a trip? Like, you're still going to be sad. You're still going to be miserable. You're still going to be in darkness and hopelessness. And it was like just a constant beat down. And I was working at that period of my life. And I just remember like work was almost like a reprieve because at work, there was I was moving through the motions, but there were interactions that had to happen so that it kept my mind sort of focused on, checking people into, I worked at U-Haul at that point, checking people in for their trucks and that sort of thing. And that was sort of like a reprieve from the doom that was happening in my mind. And then one week in August, one day in August rather, it dawned on that I didn't have to live this way anymore, and that I could take control and make a change for my outcome to sort of get done with the suffering. And that translated into a very calculated cocktail of medications and timing and all of those things. And I can't even tell you how clear and how good I felt when I made that decision. And it's really important for people to know that there's this almost, it's a falsity, but it doesn't feel like a falsity. It feels like absolute clarity, release, um, just the perfect solution, right? And I came to this point, I had thought about it before many times, obviously, as you would growing up with depression. And my psychiatrist had diagnosed that I had type 2 bipolar probably by the time I was 13. So I went untreated for a really long time. Um, but I had resolve this time. I had thought it through. So did what I had to do, push some people away, like all of the stuff that I would just make them angry. I thought making my best friend angry would worsen the blow or we lessen the blow when she found out. You're not thinking straight. So anyway, long story short, I tried valiantly. I put a lot of effort into this and failed. Literally failed. Which when I, remember coming to in the hospital in a short stay unit, was so pissed off about because it was just another thing I couldn't do right. Right. And that's how I felt in that moment. And so I had a choice to make. I was like, okay, I'm going to either pretend that I'm okay, let them let me out of here and go maybe take a more finalistic approach, or I'm going to see what's here for help or if anything help. Now, at this point, I felt like I had exhausted every possible therapy, talk therapy, medication, like everything, you can imagine. I didn't think there was anything else left for me. And I remember sitting, it was the second day, I was sitting in the room, it's padded. It was a short stay unit, so it was padded, right? So I've had that Arkham experience, if you will, padded room for 3 days. And I was sitting there on the second day and the door was open. And I must have seen like 30 or 40 different practitioners over those 3 days that I was there. But there was this one gentleman who came into the room. He could be an angel, could be. But I'll tell you what, don't know what type of practitioner he was, whether he was a nurse, a doctor, a psychiatrist, psychologist. I just don't know. I don't even know his name. But he came into the room and he just looked at me and he had very kind eyes and he was very nice. And he just said, "What's going on?" And it just felt so sincere. And I remember just bawling, of course. And I just talked for like 30, 40 minutes and crying and just saying, like, I'm just so tired. Like, I try to just keep my head above water. I'm just so tired all the time. I'm exhausted. I can't live like this. And he said, well, 4 words, but really 3 words. He said, Curtis, just stop swimming. And in that moment, I took it as like, because I'm a bit sassy, like that's what I tried to do. Here I am. But that's not what he meant. What he meant was stop fighting against it. Stop trying to stay above water. Let yourself drown, right? And I know this may sound foreign to people at this moment, but I will explain it to you. It's what we would call in the psychological world radical acceptance. So, as humans, what I was doing was fighting against my natural state of being. So, my brain doesn't work the way that other people's brains work. We've established this, it's always been that way. I have type 2 bipolar disorder. So, obviously, that's another thing that doesn't function the way that other people's brains work. And with type 2 bipolar disorder, depression is the more prevalent um, symptom, not the mania, right? So it's depression. So he left, and I ruminated on it. And then I remember the next day I had to sit in front of a panel. It was a comfortable panel, but it was still a panel of practitioners and talk about next steps and treatments and all that stuff. And I remember stopping them from talking because I was like really annoyed because they were talking about something as if I wasn't there, but I was sitting right there. And I was like, can I interrupt and ask a question? And they said, sure. I'm like, okay, explain how radical acceptance works. Like, I get the concept, but explain how you put it into motion. And she, I don't know, she clearly wasn't privy to the conversation that I had with this person yesterday or the day before. And she said, okay, radical acceptance is you just accepting that you are the way that you are, and this is your life. And you stop putting energy into trying to change that. And I'm like, but how would that look like? She was like, in your case? I'm like, yeah. You stop trying not to be depressed. You stop trying to not be you. And I'm like, okay, I hadn't tried that before. Like that was foreign to me. Like, what? This is an option. And so anyway, we had this conversation. We talked a little bit back and forth, and I gave her some scenarios, and she gave me scenarios. And I left there understanding what radical acceptance looked like for me in action, right? Because that was the piece. You can throw fancy words at me, but I need to know what it looks like to actually put it into play. So they had to decide whether or not they were letting me out or not. But anyway, I'm like, well, you go do you. I have to go think about radical acceptance. So I went back to my room and started to think about what would that look like for me? Like, based on everything now that I know, what does not trying to stay above water translate to? And the purpose of radical acceptance, or the purpose in my case from the man that I spoke to in my room, is that I spent all of my energy all day, every day, trying to be something that I wasn't, that I had nothing left to actually give myself that would be healing or fulfilling. And so I was like, okay, all right. So I get out of here, I go home, I say, I'm going to give myself 6 months. I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to say, um, I'm not going to fight about it. I'm not going to fight against it. So, what am I going to do? Okay, when I get the feeling, the overwhelming feeling of sadness, I'm going to acknowledge it. And I'm going to say, oh, hello, sadness. Nice to see you. And then just move on. And I'm like thinking in my room, I'm like, that's not enough. Like, okay, so I'm going to sit there and acknowledge that I'm sad, and that's fine. But then is there something else that I can do that can sort of pair well with that? Like a nice wine and fish, who knows? But
Okay.
so thinking, They came, called me back out, went in front of the panel. They said they were letting me out the next day. I'm like, okay, cool. And I told them exactly what I was doing, but I was still trying to figure out what's going on, like something I could pair with it. And then we had a little bit of banter about that. And then I came up with the one thing that has been consistent since I was a child, at 7 years old and probably before, um, is that my internal dialogue and my self beliefs were a dumpster fire, an absolute shit show. The way I spoke to myself internally, even in my meanest of days in my 20s, when I was so lost and misguided, I would never say to somebody else. So I'm like, that's the piece. But first, we're going to just start by practicing acknowledgement. Like, hey, sadness, how you doing? And then moving on with our lives. We're not going to try and find it. So I went home with a plan. I also went to the doctor and I said, I'm coming off all medication because I was on so many. And she's like, you can't do that. And I'm like, well, I'm doing it with or without you. So do you want to be a part of my care or do you not? Because I'm like stopping it now. And I was on 12 different medications. So this is a really good point to put out there. Obviously there was pitfalls to coming off all of those medications at that time, but I was dedicated to figuring out who I was as a base level. And then if I needed to add something, I could add something, but I could do it from a base level. So went back, started acknowledging. That's all I did. It was literally like, Kim, if you were depression, hey, Kim, how are you doing today? Nice to see you. And then going on my way. Now, if you were depression would never have looked so good, right? This is just the situation, right? So, and I would have wanted to talk to you more, but the it was just a simple thing, right? Just to say, hey, you're here. The sadness is here. The anxiety is here. The fear is here. All of these things. I don't have to do anything about it. I don't have to actually fight it. I have to pretend. Then I realized that in order to change the way I thought on the inside, I actually had to go through something that I was familiar with, was called cognitive restructuring. But we're doing this on a very nuclear level because we're going down to the very deepest of your core values to try and figure out and unscrew yourself from all of those years. So the way I approached it was every time I had a negative thought, I had to catch, and I'm an animated person, so catch it, take it, look at it, take that thought and turn it into something neutral. So say I would have had this podcast back then, I would have been like, oh my God, I can't believe I said Kim was possibly depression and depression never looks so good. I can't believe I said something like that. She's gonna think I'm such a flake or hitting on her or something, all of these crazy things. Like I would have just gone crazy. And so the goal would have been to take that thought and then make it at least neutral, but positive if we could. You were being kind, right? You made a mistake, but I don't think Kim took that the wrong way. And if she did, she could have clarified with you. It's okay. And put it back in. And I would do that with everything. And so for like 6 months, and I still do it not as animated, but I still catch myself with certain things. But for 6 months, I like literally just like this all day, catching thoughts, reframing them, putting them back inside. And I'll tell you that it was 6 months after I got out of the hospital. And I was walking through the house, just getting ready for bed. I had just placed my water on the night table and I was going to the bathroom before bed. And as I'm walking from my bedside to the bathroom, I stopped dead in my tracks. And I'm having this thought, and I'm like, no, 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 that's not possible. That's not possible. And the realization was that I think I just went a whole day without having a negative thought. And I stood there, I swear to you, 20 minutes at least in that spot, going from the morning I woke up throughout every single thing that happened that day to try and find one area, one time that I had had a negative thought. Couldn't find it. And it was a whole day without a negative thought. I still get goosies when I talk about it, but um, I remember calling my friend, my best friend, and telling her. She was really supportive and really encouraging. And I remember going to bed and pulling the covers up over me that night and just being like, and going to sleep feeling so proud of myself because here it was tangible, or not tangible, I suppose, but here was the evidence that it was working. And what's really interesting is that I'm not perfect today, right? I still have thoughts and also have like mini like fake fights in my head with somebody. But and I still have anxiety, but my internal dialogue is not negative. It is built on kindness. And it was showing kindness to myself that caused me to become extremely kind outward and to start living my life in that through that lens of being kind to everyone and everything I do. I went from someone who was depressed all the time, sad, suicidal, to being a person who's like driving down the highway from, a store 20 minutes from here and just finding myself smiling stupidly ear to ear for absolutely zero reason. And yeah, that's my story. That's who I am.
Wow. Wow. That's quite a story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Because I think one of the things, CK, is that you're so authentic and you are so you. And you're the best you. I mean, you only you can be you, first of all, but you're a pretty incredible you. I like the you are a lot.
I do too. But not in a conceited way, but in a way where I'm like, I'm happy to be who I am. And I know all of the scars and the trials and tribulations and happiness and sadness that went into creating this version of me. I regret nothing. I take nothing back. There might have been a few people I hurt in my 20s that I wish that I could undo, but I have forgiven myself for doing that. I'm not in contact with them anymore. I would never just call them up and be like, I'm really sorry, and try to reopen a wound. But if they ever watch this podcast or any podcast I've done, I am truly sorry if I hurt you. I was lost and hurt myself. But the key thing, the piece that I love the most is that when I stopped trying to be the version of somebody that everybody else, the church, society, school, and just leaned into who I was authentically, life became wonderful. Like absolutely wonderful. Someone asked me not too long ago, um, and it was at work, how do you do what you do? Because I have a I have a knack. So somebody can give me a complex problem and I can like solve it and champion it in a very short period of time. And they're like, how do you do that? I'm like, well, I'm like, I might be autistic. I don't know. Like, I certainly have some of the signs. But I think it came from instead of trying to fight against the way my brain worked and process information, and like doing math is like my kryptonite. So, but it, once I stopped trying to be someone different and embraced how my brain processed that information, it was like, holy moly, there was nothing I couldn't figure out. Now, I can't figure out astrophysics and I wouldn't cut somebody open to deliver surgery. But like, I feel confident enough that if I decided that I wanted to learn how to do surgery tomorrow, that I could figure it out pretty quickly. But it was literally embracing my weird, if you will, the thing that set me apart, which I mean, now as I'm older, I get to meet all kinds of people who think and emote and process information just like I do, right? Where you feel so isolated when you're younger.
Mhm.
Now you're just like, maybe the atypical is actually the neurodivergent, and the neurodivergent are the typical people because there seems to be a growing number of them everywhere you look.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And it's interesting to me. I always thought it would be so cool if you could spend a day in somebody else's head. Like
Mm.
just to just to learn how they think, how they process anything. And I think, in so many ways we're so much alike, but in so many ways we're also different from each other.
Oh
And
yes.
so to be in somebody else's mind, man, it would be like, I don't know, it could be like Disney World, or it could be like, who knows, right?
It could be on that spectrum, right? It could be World, or it could be a nightmare. And that's the thing that I like. The lesson of you don't know what someone's going through is is so relevant and so prevalent in my mind when I talk to somebody. People can come across as jovial and um, upbeat and has their shit together, all of those particular things, but literally be dying on the inside. And we don't know. We literally don't know this. I recorded a podcast last night because yesterday was the election. And I felt something very heavy on my mind and heart. And I just wanted to record this podcast, put it out on the day. Whoever saw it, it didn't matter to me. It never does. But it's just, this was the message I really wanted to share. And that message was, at the end of the day, regardless of the outcome of the election, we have to be kind, and kind to ourselves and kind to others. And we need kindness now in this world more than absolutely anything else, is to be kind to each other and to share. Like, every person that we're dealing with is a human who's got their own story, who's going through their own things, and we don't know why they voted for this person versus that person. You might think, oh, they're an idiot or something like that because they've made this choice or that. We don't know what their story is and why it is they view any particular person as a better candidate or the candidate of their choice. It's usually deeper than just money and policy, right? And
Right.
so when we look at it, and everybody has their desired way. They want to see things go their own way. But when it doesn't, we can't meet people with unkindness. We have to be kind, and first kind to ourselves. And that's not selfish. That is literally the way forward. You need that kindness to yourself, because when you're kind to yourself, you start to fill yourself up, and that goes outward.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting point that you're making, that it's not selfish. Because I think so often you hear, oh my gosh, do you love yourself? That's ego. That's whatever, don't love yourself too much, or whatever, especially probably within the church. But the reality is we're all created. I think of like the Mona Lisa, right? Like if it ever went up for sale, who knows how many millions and millions it would sell for us, because it's a one of a kind masterpiece. And so are you, right? We're a one of a kind masterpiece made by the master.
Mhm.
Like if you look in the mirror and you go, oh, you're not worthy of love, you're not worth it to be here, you're bad in whatever way you're bad. It's basically saying, God, you screwed up with me. You might have done okay with other people, but with me, you totally screwed up. Like, what were you thinking?
Well, I
So,
thought for 35 years.
yeah, right, right. Which I can understand why you would think that way because of how you're raised, because of what you're told over and over again, right? And the things that you hear. And you question, am I wrong? Am I right? Am I supposed to feel like this? Am I not? Like, why do I feel like this? And if it's wrong, why do I feel like this? If it's right, why do people believe that way? It would be this so many emotions, I imagine, going through, and most of them not positive. Most of them not positive. And so, like with my kids, uh, they had friends that that are gay, and when they're 5 years old and they're playing with a friend, they're playing with a friend, and then they grow up with this friend, and they're still friends. In fact, this weekend, my one son does it. He calls it the Sorrelle basement reunion. So all the guys that used to come and hang out at our house in our basement are coming over. They fly in from all over, like all over the world. They fly in from once a year to be together, spend this weekend together.
How much?
And yeah, it's so fun. And they use my house to do it because I got a basement, whatever. Anyway, some of them are gay. And I watched the struggles that they needlessly went through. And and I thought, wow, what are we doing to people? Because it's not just gay people that we're hurting. We're hurting so many people groups. And I don't understand that. So I love that you're talking about kindness because that's absolutely true. And embrace who you are. You are who you're created to be, right? I mean, people talk about purpose and, well, what's my purpose? I don't know my purpose, where I got to figure out my purpose. You know what your purpose is? Your purpose is to be who you're created to
Absolutely.
be fully, completely who you're created to be. That's your purpose. So when you're not doing that, you're not living in this great alignment with God and the world and the earth and whatever, right? You're
Yeah.
fighting against it. It's like you're putting up this wall and fighting against it. But when you can embrace and love and recognize who you are, because it's who you were created to be, and then live it, man, that's freedom. That is freedom.
It's freedom, and I feel that you have the capacity to impact others in ways that you had no idea. And if you look at it, for the first, I want to say half my life, we don't know if I'm going to make it to 70 or not, but we'll see. But for the first half of my life, I don't think that I impacted well, especially in my 20s, right? Because I was really lost, confused, and full of anger. But from 35 onward, I've noticed that just by existing, just by being kind in every situation and everything I do, I'm impacting the lives of others, not greatly. I might not be changing their world, but I might be making their day better. And I've had people literally come to me and say, like, do you know how wonderful you are? Do you know that, like, I was just feeling really blue and under the weather the other day, and you just, I don't remember what you said, but you said this, and it just made me feel really warm, like really good. And I'm like, oh, I'm glad. I'm like, you deserve to feel warm and good. Everybody deserves to feel warm and good. Everyone deserves to feel happy and what kindness feels like from somebody else. Um, and so kindness, I guess, is my brand. It's not even my reputation, because my reputation is what people perceive of me, right? Which I mean, it's my reputation, I think, for the most part, it matches my brand. But like when I wake up in the morning and I think of any situation, my first thought is, would this be kind? And there's a really important call that I need to make here. You have to absolutely not get this confused, your listeners. There's a massive difference between being kind and being nice. They are not the same thing. People can be nice and not mean it. right? But you can be
Right.
kind and put someone in their place.
Mhm.
See, there's a
Mhm.
there's a very important distinction. So being kind doesn't mean people walk over me, or I would allow that to happen. But when I'm interacting with them, even if it has to be to set boundaries and to tell them, like, no, I'm sorry, this isn't how that's going to play out. I'm going to do it through kindness. And that's the distinction.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's so good. You're so wise. I love it. Yeah. So the wisdom right back at you, brother. But
Thank you.
one thing that I discovered when I was doing this whole year figuring out love and using love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast, etc. When I got to love is kind, I thought, well, I know what that is. You say kind things, you do kind things, whatever. Maybe you're buying the person behind you at Starbucks their coffee, that's an act of kindness. But what I discovered is that love that is kind is kindness with zero expectation of getting anything in return. Nothing, nothing. Not someday someone will buy your coffee. Not I went to their daughter's wedding. Why aren't they at mine? Not I brought them a casserole when they were sick. Why aren't they bringing me a casserole? That's no longer kind. It might have been a kind act that you did, but you're stealing any bit of love away from that.
Mhm.
There's no love in that.
Kindness isn't transactional.
No, it's not transactional. Great way to put it. Absolutely.
It's,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
a state of being. I think and this is something I notice that I just do a lot. Not necessarily that I'm completely altruistic because I'm not a saint, y'all. I want to point this out. But like I do notice in a lot of situations where people I can read a room and I can read a person really well. And if I tell someone's down or they're stressed out, just for absolutely no reason, I will give them some sort of genuine compliment about their work, about how they approach things, or things like that. I don't want anything in return. What I want for them is to feel valued in that moment. And if it can impact them in any way, then I've won the whole day. Like to me, like it's not about a competition. Like how many times can I compliment someone either? For me, kindness has also got to be genuine.
Mm.
So you're not just giving somebody a compliment for the sake of giving a compliment. I think that's fake. But if you truly see someone who may need a compliment and you have one, give it to them. Tell them. Tell them that you value them in whatever capacity. That's kindness. You're just giving something away for free with no expectation of
Hmm.
return. So
Yeah. 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 I love that. And, it can be muddy when you try to explain it because
mhm,
it has nothing to do with ego. It has nothing to do with anything else. It has everything to do with love. It has everything to do with recognizing the value of whoever it is you're in a room with, whoever that is, right?
I think if you look at acts of kindness through the lens of how it's going to make the other person feel and end it there, you're good. Because yes, there's an automatic sort of like little bit of a good warm feeling you get yourself when you do something kind for someone else. But if you look at kindness with like, it's going to make this person feel good and it's going to make me feel good. And then down the road, if I need something from that person, then they're going to remember that I was kind and, that's transactional and not really love is kind. It's because you're doing it with expectation. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that you talked about that. I love that you brought kindness up because it is such a big deal. And I did listen to your podcast, by the way. And when you were talking about be kind to others, whoever got elected, whatever the outcome, sad to hear about your cat, by the way. But what
Uh,
you had to say was just so true and so good. And CK, we are out of time. I can't believe it. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. I thank you so much for sharing your story, for being here, for being such a great guy. I just appreciate you more than words can say.
Well, back at you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. I was being mindful while I was talking. I'm like, oh, geez, I'm just talking a lot. I'm like, poor Kim hasn't had a moment to speak. And so I apologize for taking up all of that time. But yes, no, it's thank you for watching, listening to the podcast, and thank you for having me here. You are just a very, very much of a light as a person, and you have this sparkle about you. And it was nice seeing you again. And I hope that this is not our last time interacting either. So,
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So people can listen to you. You have a website. Where do you want people to go?
you can find me on YouTube, Pod My Noggin. So it's PODDIN apostrophe my noggin. It's just a play on words. And you can also find me at cksims.com. Yeah, I'm on all platforms when it comes to podcasting. I have a book. It's not with me at this moment. It's a fictional book. It's called Life in Stitches. It's Life in Stitches. And yeah, that's me. But I hope everyone is well, be kind, and um, love yourselves and love others. That's
Hmm.
it.
Yes. Amen. 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 To all of that for sure. Okay. So thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And until we see each other again, be blessed.